Welcome to Demon Sleep. I'm here to help you unwind tonight. If you enjoy this space, feel free to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It makes this feel like a shared night across the world. These stories are different and I'm glad you're here. Dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's begin. Story 1. The call that arrived too late to ignore. The speedometer trembled as it crept past 75, the needle shaking like it knew what was at stake. Mark Fielding pushed the pedal lower anyway. The borrowed sedan complained, a strained whine rising from under the hood, but he ignored it. The road didn't care about excuses. Time didn't either. 6 hours earlier, his life had still been neatly divided into charts and forecasts. He'd been seated at a long table in a sunlit conference room in Phoenix, nodding at numbers he barely heard, when his phone vibrated against the wood. Danny's name flashed on the screen. Mark had hesitated. His 18-year-old son never called during the workday unless he wanted cash or had managed to land himself in trouble. Something, instinct, guilt, maybe fate, pulled Mark to his feet. He stepped into the hallway and answered. "Mr. Fielding," a calm woman's voice said. Not Danny, not panicked, measured, controlled. "This is Brenda Shaw from Carson Tahoe Regional Medical Center. I'm calling about your son, Daniel." The corridor seemed to tilt. Mark's hand shot out, gripping the doorframe as if the building itself might slide away. His knees weakened, a strange hollow opening in his chest. "There's been an accident," the voice continued. "A motorcycle collision. He's in critical condition. Multiple injuries. You need to come immediately." Immediately. Now Mark was climbing through the Sierra Nevada, asphalt twisting beneath him like a living thing. Fog swallowed the highway outside Carson City, dense and suffocating, turning familiar lanes into a tunnel of uncertainty. He leaned forward, eyes burning, staring through the windshield as if willpower alone could clear the gray wall ahead. The headlights barely reached 20 feet. At this speed, on these curves, it was madness. But slowing felt impossible. Every second he eased off the gas was another second Danny slipped further away. The word the nurse hadn't spoken echoed anyway, pounding against his thoughts. Dying, dying, dying. 3 years ago, Carol had stood in their kitchen, voice raw with anger and exhaustion. "You're never there when it counts," she'd said. "Always gone, always choosing work over us." Mark had defended himself then, armed with logic and promises. But logic didn't attend school ceremonies or sit in bleachers. It didn't notice how a boy's eyes searched the crowd. He'd missed Danny's graduation speech for a client dinner in Denver, missed the championship game for a conference in Chicago, missed countless dinners, conversations, ordinary evenings that quietly add up to a family. And now this. Mark tightened his grip on the wheel, his hands aching. The fog thickened as the road climbed higher, swallowing signs, swallowing distance, swallowing certainty. He'd driven this route before, casually, without fear. Tonight it felt like a test, each mile asking the same question. Would he finally arrive when it mattered most? 10 years earlier, when Danny was still small enough to fall asleep in the passenger seat, they had camped near Lake Tahoe. Carol had made that trip a condition. No laptop, no buzzing phone, no excuses. Just the three of them, pine trees, cold water, and mountains so massive they stole the breath from Danny's lungs. Mark remembered his son standing at the edge of the lake, eyes wide, whispering like he was afraid the peaks might hear him. That memory should have felt comforting. Instead, the same region now felt like a descent into something unholy. The world outside the windshield had collapsed into layers of gray. No sky, no trees, no distance, just fog swallowing the road inch by inch, as if the night itself were closing in. Mark barely saw it in time, a human shape forming out of the haze. His foot twitched toward the brake. A man stood on the shoulder, arm raised, thumb pointed upward in that familiar plea every driver recognizes. Mark's first instinct was to fly past him. He didn't owe anyone anything tonight. Danny needed him. Nothing else mattered. But his speed dropped anyway. The man was old, not just elderly, fragile looking. His coat hung off his narrow body like it belonged to someone larger who had vanished. He didn't step back as the car neared, didn't flinch, just stood there, calm and unmoving, as if the fog itself had placed him there on purpose. The headlights washed over his face, pale and deeply creased, his eyes dark and unsettlingly focused, not on the car, on Mark. There was no urgency in his stance, no fear, just patience, the kind that comes from certainty. Against every rational thought screaming in his head, Mark pulled onto the shoulder. The engine idled, impatient. He cracked the passenger window, rain-speckled air rushing in. "Where are you headed?" he called out, already regretting stopping. The man walked closer, each step slow and deliberate, shoes whispering against wet pavement. Up close, his face felt wrong, not merely aged, but worn in a way that suggested long exposure to things most people never see. "Just beyond the pass," the man said. His voice was rough, low, carrying an accent Mark couldn't quite place. Something foreign softened by decades of use, like a language remembered rather than spoken. Before Mark could reconsider, his hand reached down and unlocked the doors. The old man slid into the seat with surprising ease. He fastened his seatbelt carefully, almost ceremonially, then folded his hands in his lap. His fingers were thin, the skin stretched tight and nearly translucent. "Thank you," he said softly. "I've been waiting a long time." The words lingered, strange and heavy. Mark pulled back onto the road and slammed the accelerator down, the car surging forward as the fog closed in behind them. The fog grew heavier, impossibly so, as if the night were thickening on purpose. The broken yellow line flickered beneath the car, appearing and vanishing in short bursts, like a coded warning Mark couldn't decipher fast enough. "Not a good night to be on the road," the old man said. There was no anxiety in his voice, no edge, just a calm acknowledgement, the way someone might comment on rain falling exactly as expected. That calm unsettled Mark more than fear would have. Anyone else would have been gripping the seat, questioning the speed, sensing the urgency clawing at the air inside the car. And then there was something else, subtle, disturbing. The man's voice didn't feel anchored to the passenger seat. It seemed to drift, to surround Mark, as if it came from the fog itself. Mark shook his head once. Hard lack of sleep, adrenaline, a mind stretched too thin. "My son's in the hospital," he said shortly, as if the words were a shield. "Motorcycle accident, he's critical." The old man turned slightly, studying Mark's face like it held a long story written between the lines. "How old?" 18, just finished high school. Saying it aloud tightened Mark's chest, made everything sharper, more fragile. "We bought him the bike as a graduation gift. I didn't want to. I knew better." "You knew," the man echoed. "I should have stopped it," Mark continued, the words tumbling out now. "Should have said no, should have insisted." "Should have, would have, could have," the old man murmured, the familiar prayer of every parent. Mark glanced sideways, and his breath caught. In the reflection of the passenger window, the old man was staring straight at him, not casually, not briefly. Those dark, ancient eyes were locked onto Mark with an intensity that felt invasive, as if they were reading him from the inside out. But when Mark snapped his head to look directly, the man was facing forward, eyes calmly on the road. Mark blinked once, twice. The reflection now matched reality. Stress, he told himself, fatigue, fear twisting perception. "You have children?" Mark asked, forcing steadiness into his voice. "I've known many," the old man replied. "Watch them grow, watch them choose, watch them fall." There was weight behind the words, a heaviness that didn't sound imagined. "That's the hardest part of age," the man continued softly. "Seeing the young repeat the same paths, the same missteps, believing they're different this time." "Danny didn't mess up," Mark snapped. "He was just riding wrong place, wrong moment." A pause. Was he wearing a helmet? The question landed like a physical blow. Mark's jaw tightened. He had lectured Danny endlessly, bought the best helmet money could buy, said all the right things parents say when they're trying to protect someone who doesn't yet believe they can be hurt. "I don't know," he admitted. "The nurse didn't say." The road climbed higher, the incline tightening, curves stacking one after another as they crested what Mark hoped was just another rise. The fog erased any sense of distance or direction, leaving only the winding ascent ahead, endless, uncertain, and closing in. The road folded back on itself again and again, tight turns that forced Mark's hands to clamp harder around the wheel until his fingers ached. It struck him then. There was no one else out here. No red glow of taillights ahead. No approaching beams in the mirror. Just the hum of the engine and the two of them rising through this colorless nowhere. "Tell me about him," the old man said gently. "Your boy." Mark swallowed. Speaking about Danny felt dangerous, like nomming something fragile might cause it to shatter. Yet the tone, warm, unhurried, sincere, pulled the words from him anyway. "He's brilliant," Mark said quietly. "Always has been. Got into Berkeley with an academic scholarship. Wants to be an engineer." As he spoke, his voice steady. Talking about Danny's plans made them feel solid, as if the future itself were proof he'd be all right. "He sees how things fit together," Mark continued. "Takes apart electronics just to understand them. When he was little, he'd sit for hours building these crazy structures out of blocks, always testing limits." "Like you," the old man said. Mark gave a short, breathless laugh. "I analyze systems for a living, corporate stuff, numbers on screens, not nearly as interesting as what he does." Only then did Mark realize he was speaking as if nothing had happened, as if Danny were still moving forward, uninterrupted. The thought both comforted and terrified him. "He hates routine," Mark added. "Gets restless. That's why he wanted the motorcycle, said cars were boring, too predictable." The old man fell silent. After a moment, he lifted one thin hand and gestured toward the fog-shrouded trees barely visible beyond the guardrail. "There," he said softly, "that one was bad." Mark squinted but saw nothing but shadow and mist. "Family from Sacramento," the man went on. "Christmas Eve, late 80s, ice on the road." Mark's chest tightened. "Car went through the rail," the old man continued evenly. "Father driving, trying to make it home before morning. 2 little girls asleep in the back, presents in the trunk. Their mother was expecting another." A chill spread through Mark's stomach. "How do you know that?" Instead of answering, the old man pointed across the road. "And there," he said, "young couple, early 90s, on their honeymoon, rushing to catch a flight out of Reno. Husband hadn't slept in over a day." Mark eased off the accelerator, his foot hovering, then pressing the brake. The car slowed, tires whispering against the slick pavement. "Look," Mark said, tension sharpening his voice. "I don't know what you're doing, but—" "There's no trick here," the old man interrupted calmly. "Just memory." "Memory of what?" "Of this road," he said. "You spend enough time in one place, you learn its stories." Mark glanced at him. "You live up here." "You could say that." The man's mouth curved slightly, almost into a smile. "I used to work these passes," he added, "help people get where they were going." The words felt wrong the moment they left the old man's mouth, but before Mark could question them, the man kept going, as if reading from a ledger no one else could see. "Mid-90s," he said. "Just past the bend ahead, a teenage girl driving home alone. Left a party she wasn't supposed to attend. She never made it back." There was no drama in his tone, no sympathy, just facts laid out clean and cold. Her parents spent the night calling friends, hospitals, anyone who might know something. They didn't learn the truth until morning. "Stop," Mark said sharply. "Just stop talking." But the man didn't pause. "Early autumn a few years later," he continued, "right after the world changed overnight, a man drove east, desperate to reach his family. Flying wasn't an option. He hadn't slept in days, too busy watching the news, trying to understand what kind of place the world had become." Mark slammed the brakes harder. The speed dropped fast, 40, then 30. "I said stop." "He kept photographs on the seat beside him," the old man went on calmly. "His wife, 2 young boys. He looked at them more than the road." The car rolled to a halt on the shoulder. "They found the pictures scattered across the mountainside," the man added. "Some were never found." Mark sat frozen, the engine idling, his hands trembling as they clenched the steering wheel. "What is wrong with you?" he snapped. "My son is fighting for his life, and you're telling me horror stories like this means nothing." For the first time, the old man turned fully toward him. His eyes were impossibly old, heavy with a sorrow so deep it felt like gravity. It pulled at Mark's chest, stealing his breath. "I'm not telling stories," the man said softly. "I'm explaining reality." Mark swallowed. "This road has taken people for decades," the man continued. "Not reckless thrill seekers, just ordinary souls in a hurry, parents, children, spouses, all trying to reach someone they love, all believing speed could outrun fate." "How do you know my name?" Mark demanded. He hadn't given it. The old man's voice softened, almost kind. "I know many things about those I meet here," he said. "I know you're 53. I know you live alone in an apartment that echoes at night. I know you and your former wife haven't spoken in half a year, and that you haven't seen your son since winter." The color drained from Mark's face. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Someone who guides travelers," the man replied simply. "Someone who's been doing it far longer than you'd expect." Mark's hand slid toward the door handle. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to abandon this impossible stranger and get back on the road. But he didn't move. Something deeper than fear held him there. A quiet understanding that whatever rules governed the rest of the world didn't apply tonight. "What kind of guidance?" Mark asked. The old man's expression didn't change. "The kind people need," he said gently, "when their journey doesn't unfold the way they imagined, where they're truly headed." Mark stared through the windshield. The fog had thickened again, no longer drifting but pressing close, smearing itself against the glass like hands searching for purchase. A quiet certainty settled in his chest. Something essential had shifted while the car sat still, as if the world had subtly rearranged itself around them, and only he hadn't been informed. "I need to reach the hospital," Mark said. The words sounded rehearsed, weak. "Yes," the old man replied calmly. "You do." Mark shifted into drive and eased back onto the road. The tires rolled forward, but a sudden jolt of fear shot through him. His eyes dropped to the dashboard. The odometer hadn't changed. It read exactly what it had before, not a tenth of a mile more, as if time itself had stalled, as if they'd gone nowhere at all. His pulse hammered. They continued climbing through the mountains, yet the strangeness multiplied. The fuel needle refused to budge. The clock glowed with the same unmoving minute. His phone, once frantic with missed calls and voicemails, showed no signal, no history, no proof that any of this had begun hours ago in a conference room far away. It was like the world had erased its own evidence. "Tell me about the crash," the old man said gently. "Your son's crash." Mark's throat tightened. "Intersection," he managed. "Motorcycle and an SUV. The other driver ran the light." He swallowed hard. Danny was thrown. The sentence collapsed before it could finish. "Do you know the injuries?" "Head trauma, internal bleeding, broken bones." The words came out flat, clinical armor he'd learned to wear. He was unconscious when they got there. A pause. "But alive," Mark added quickly. "He's alive." The old man inclined his head. "Hope can carry a person farther than reason ever could," he said. "Sometimes it saves us. Sometimes it drives us straight into danger." "What's that supposed to mean?" Mark snapped. "Only this," the man replied. "Love pushes us to extremes. It convinces us speed equals salvation. That urgency justifies risk. That if we hurry enough, we can rewrite what's already in motion." A chill crept up Mark's spine, sharp and unnatural. "I'm being careful," he said. "Are you?" Mark glanced down. The speedometer needle was rising again, climbing toward 80. He hadn't pressed the accelerator. His grip tightened until his hands ached, his body rigid as the car surged through the fog-slicked curves. "These turns can be unforgiving," the old man said mildly. "Many people believe they had control right up until the moment they didn't. Learn that only after it's too late." Almost on cue, Mark noticed a faint glow down the slope to the right. Between the trees, far below the guardrail, red and blue lights pulsed softly, muted by distance and fog. For a split second, the shape of twisted metal seemed to catch the light, jagged, broken, unmistakable. "Did you see that?" Mark asked, his voice tight. "See what?" He looked again. Nothing. No lights, no movement. Just darkness and fog swallowing the mountainside. "I thought I saw emergency vehicles," Mark said. "Like there been a crash." "Headlight reflections," the old man replied easily. "Fog is very convincing when it wants to be." But Mark was certain the man had seen it too. More than that, he felt the old man understood exactly what it represented. They drove on without speaking. Minutes stretched thin, the engine strained, tires whispered against wet pavement. The road unfolded endlessly, each curve revealing only more gray, more ascent, more nowhere. Mark kept checking the odometer over and over, but it barely seemed to move. The numbers changed just enough to suggest progress, yet never enough to mean anything. It felt like climbing inside a loop, always rising, never arriving. "How much farther?" Mark asked finally. "To the pass." Very close, the old man said. We're nearly there. Mark frowned. He'd been driving for what felt like hours. The fog was thicker now, the world reduced to a narrow tunnel of light. If anything, they felt farther from the summit than ever. I need to call the hospital, Mark said. I need an update. He reached for his phone. The screen stayed black. The device felt wrong in his hand, too light, too hollow, like an imitation of itself. No signal up here, the old man said calmly. The mountains block it. You'll have reception once we descend. Mark set the phone aside, unsettled. He was certain he'd had service earlier. He remembered calling, panicking, talking to someone. But the details were slipping. The nurse, he thought suddenly, the one who called him. What was her name? Mark asked slowly. The old man turned slightly curious. I don't know, what was it? Mark searched his memory. He could hear her voice perfectly, steady, controlled, distant, but the name wouldn't come. Brenda, he said after a moment. I think Brenda something. The harder he reached for it, the less real it felt, like trying to grab smoke. It doesn't matter, Mark said, forcing certainty. She said my son was critical. Yes, the old man agreed quietly. That's what matters. They continued climbing, swallowed by fog, the road ahead offering no sign of an end. Only more turns, more silence, and the growing sense that this journey was no longer taking place entirely in the world Mark understood. The fog pressed in again, and Mark's thoughts drifted backward, back to Danny as a boy, fearless, restless, always climbing higher than he should, pedaling faster than made sense, laughing while gravity dared him to fall. Carol used to watch from the porch, worry etched into her face. Mark had waved it off. He needs to test himself, he'd said. That's how boys grow. Now that belief felt fragile, dangerous. He pictured his son broken in a hospital room, machines breathing for him, while he tore through the night trying to make up for years he couldn't reclaim. Mark's chest tightened. Guilt is a heavy thing to carry, the old man said quietly, as if the thought had slipped straight out of Mark's mind. I'm not, Mark started, then stopped. He was guilty of missed birthdays, missed games, missed ordinary evenings that never announce their importance until they're gone. Guilty of believing there would always be time later. I should have been better, Mark said at last. Maybe then this wouldn't have happened. The old man's gaze stayed forward. Would your son have chosen differently if you'd been home more? Mark considered it. Danny had always been his own person, stubborn, curious, unwilling to wait for permission. Probably not, Mark admitted. Then why punish yourself with imaginary versions of the past? Mark exhaled slowly. Because that's what loving someone costs. When something goes wrong, parents assume the debt. The old man nodded, faint approval in the gesture. Now you're starting to see clearly. See what? The real purpose of this drive, the man replied. It isn't just about reaching a building full of doctors. It's about facing who you've been, the choices you made, the man you became while you were busy becoming successful. The words landed with unsettling precision. Mark felt a strange recognition, like hearing a truth he'd always known but never spoken. Maybe, he said, but I still need to get to my son. Yes, the old man agreed. You do. The road finally eased. The steep climb softened and the fog began to loosen its grip. Breaks appeared in the gray, revealing a valley below, pinpricks of light scattered across darkness. Homes, towns, lives continuing. Mark felt a fragile lift of hope. How much farther until you get where you're going? He asked. Not far now, the old man said. We're almost there. As the car started down the other side of the pass, a wave of familiarity washed over Mark. The bends, the guardrails, the way the lights lay in the valley, it all felt eerily known, like a memory replaying itself. But that made no sense. He'd only driven this route once before, years ago, with Carol and Danny laughing in the backseat. Just ahead, the old man said, pointing. There's a turnout. You can let me off there. Mark eased into the overlook, a small patch of pavement with a lonely picnic table and an overfilled trash bin. The fog here was thinner now, drifting instead of suffocating, as if the mountain were finally letting go. The fog thinned here, curling around the car like smoke caught in a slow draft. The old man unbuckled his seat belt and turned toward Mark. Thank you for the ride, he said quietly. It's been enlightening. Yeah, thanks, Mark muttered, keeping the engine running, eager to get back on the road. Yet a strange hesitation lingered, a tug in his gut telling him this wasn't just a casual farewell. The old man opened the door, paused, and looked back. One piece of advice, if I may. What? Sometimes the most important part of a journey isn't the destination at all. It's understanding why you had to take it in the first place. Before Mark could ask what he meant, the man stepped out and closed the door. Mark watched him move to the edge of the overlook, a solitary silhouette against the swirling fog. There was a weight to his stance, as if he were waiting for someone, or perhaps for something inevitable. Mark shook the thought off, pressing the car back onto the highway. In the rearview mirror, the old man vanished into the mist and darkness. Good riddance, Mark told himself. Now he could focus. The hospital, Danny, that was all that mattered. The descent began, curve after curve, and Mark pushed the speedometer toward 75. The fog was lifting quickly, revealing the stark, jagged beauty of the Sierra Nevada slopes. Soon, the long straights of the valley would allow him to make up time. His phone buzzed. A text from Carol. Mark, please call me as soon as you get this. It's about Danny. It's important. A cold fist gripped his heart. Something had changed. Had Danny's condition worsened while he fought through the mountains? He tried calling back, but the line wouldn't connect. Full signal, nothing registering. Mark slammed his foot harder on the accelerator. Whatever Carol needed to say could wait until he was at the hospital. He had driven too long, raced too far, battled too many fears to let anything slow him now. The road curved relentlessly, but familiarity crept in. Landmarks from a long-ago trip surfaced. The overlook where Danny had posed for pictures of the valley. The roadside diner where he had insisted on the largest burger available. Memories of laughter, of simpler days, before divorce, before the distance, before the weight of years pressed on his shoulders. A sharp turn brought the lights into view, flashing red and blue, strobing through the thinning fog. Mark's chest tightened as the scene ahead took shape. Something had happened, something real, and now, finally, there was no turning back. Darkness spread ahead like the remnants of a broken carnival, twisted lights and jagged shadows dancing in the fog. Mark's chest tightened as he took in the chaos. Police cruisers, fire trucks, ambulances, the familiar ballet of emergency response descending on the highway like mechanical vultures. Traffic crawled past the scene, diverted by flashing lights and uniformed officers. Floodlights illuminated the wreckage, bathing it in a harsh, surreal glow. A small silver car lay mangled against the concrete barrier, front end crushed beyond recognition. The roof peeled back, metal twisted like a sardine can. Mark had seen crashes before, but this one made his blood run icy. He leaned forward, eyes straining through the passenger window. Silver four-door, rental plates from Nevada, just like the car he'd been driving. Even the pattern of damage, it was eerily familiar, as though he'd witnessed this precise moment already. But that was impossible. This had just happened. Emergency personnel were still at work, lifting equipment, guiding traffic, tending to lives teetering on the edge. A paramedic rolled a gurney toward an ambulance, a sheet covering the figure entirely. Mark's gaze caught the arm sticking out, the wrist adorned with a watch identical to the one he wore, a Timex his father had given him on graduation day 35 years ago. The world tipped sideways. He jerked the wheel and pulled onto the shoulder, hands trembling so violently he could barely grip the steering wheel. The engine idled. His heart thundered. He was alive, breathing, every nerve screaming that he was still here. But fragments of reality clicked together with terrifying clarity. The frozen odometer, the unchanging clock, the endless fog clinging to the mountain pass, the old man's impossible knowledge of accidents that hadn't yet, or should have never, occurred. This drive had stretched beyond normal time, and everything he'd seen tonight pointed to a truth too large to comprehend. The old man's words returned to him, haunting in their simplicity. Sometimes the most important part of a journey isn't reaching your destination. Sometimes it's understanding why you had to take it at all. Mark stared at his hands on the wheel. The dashboard lights made them seem almost unreal, translucent like tissue stretched over bone. When he pressed a palm to the wheel, it felt insubstantial, like even his own flesh might vanish if he wasn't careful, swallowed by this twisted intersection of time, choice, and fate. Mark pressed his palm against the seat. He could feel the fabric, every ridge and worn thread, yet the sensation felt delayed, distant, like touching the world through glass. With numb fingers, he called Carol again. This time the call connected. Mark, her voice came through thin and hollow, as if dragged up from the bottom of a deep well. Mark, where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours. I'm almost at the hospital, he said. The words sounded wrong even to him, stretched and faint. How, Danny? Silence answered him. Long, echoing silence that seemed to expand, swallowing time itself. Then Carol spoke again, her voice thick with tears, still carrying that terrible distance. Mark, honey, Danny, going to be okay. The doctors say he's stable. He's going to make a full recovery. Relief slammed into Mark's chest, knocking the breath from him. Thank God, he whispered. I was so scared. But Mark, her voice cracked. Where are you? The hospital called. They said you were in an accident on Highway 50. A sharp, piercing tone burst through the line. Thin, endless. The sound of a heart monitor screaming into nothingness. It swelled, drowning out Carol's voice until it was the only thing left, stretching, warping, screaming into infinity. Then the call went dead. Mark lowered the phone slowly and stared at it, as if it might explain itself. In the rearview mirror, the crash site still burned against the fog, red and blue lights flashing in frantic rhythm, painting the darkness with disaster. The scene felt closer than it should have been, closer than distance allowed. He opened the door and stepped out. Every instinct told him to drive away, to leave, to survive. Instead, he walked back toward the wreck. The asphalt beneath his feet felt wrong, soft, unreal, like he was walking on the memory of a road rather than the road itself. Yellow police tape fluttered across his path, but when he reached it, he passed straight through. No resistance, no sound. No one noticed. Officers shouted orders. Paramedics moved with practiced urgency. Not a single one looked at him. Mark's legs trembled as he approached the destroyed car. The silver Camry was obliterated, metal folded inward, glass scattered like ice, and inside among the wreckage were pieces of his life. A coffee cup from a gas station in Phoenix. His briefcase, logo still visible through the grime. A photograph of Danny at his high school graduation, tucked into the sun visor. Things that belonged in his car. Things that were in his car. "Excuse me," Mark said, his voice barely more than breath. A paramedic stood inches away, scribbling on a clipboard. He didn't look up, didn't react, didn't hear him at all. Mark stepped closer to the gurney. His body moved without permission, as if guided by something older than fear. The hand that reached for the sheet didn't feel like his own. It trembled, slow and uncertain, before hooking beneath the fabric and pulling it back. His face stared up at him. Eyes closed, skin drained of warmth. A deep gash split the forehead where it had met the steering wheel. Death had smoothed his features into something unfamiliar, but there was no mistaking it. The small scar above the left eyebrow, the one from a childhood bicycle crash, sat exactly where it always had. Proof. Mark staggered backward. The sheet slipped from his useless fingers and fell back into place. The world lurched, spinning violently, and for a moment he was certain he would collapse. But he didn't. He remained upright, remained conscious. Remained. "Sir." The voice came from behind him. Mark turned. A young police officer was approaching, but the man's eyes passed straight through him, locking instead on someone standing near the wreckage. "Sir, you can't be back here. This is an active scene." Mark followed the officer's line of sight. The old man stood by the twisted Camry, dark coat buttoned neatly, hands folded behind his back. The passenger, the guide, the man who had never truly been a passenger at all. "Of course," the old man said calmly. "I was just paying my respects." "Did you know the victim?" the officer asked. The old man turned his head and looked directly at Mark. For the first time, there was recognition in those ancient eyes, not the surprise of meeting someone new, but the quiet acknowledgement of something completed, a task fulfilled. "We traveled together," the old man said simply. He was a good companion, very determined to reach his destination. The officer nodded and walked away, already forgetting the exchange. The old man approached Mark. His footsteps made no sound against the asphalt. "You understand now," he said gently. "It was never a question." Mark looked down at the body on the gurney, then at his own hands, pale, faintly translucent, the dashboard light still ghosting through his skin. Then back at the impossible man who had guided him through his final miles. "How long?" Mark asked, his voice barely present. "How long since the accident?" "About 2 hours," the old man replied. "You lost control near the curb where the fog was thickest. Too much speed, too little visibility, too much desperation to reach someone you loved." Memories tried to assemble themselves. Phoenix, a conference room, a ringing phone, the nurse's voice, panic, the frantic need to move to get there to be a father again. But after that, the hours collapsed in on themselves. He remembered driving but not flying, gas stations without names, highway signs without numbers. The long climb into the mountains felt compressed, folded like a dream remembered too late. Pieces of the journey floated disconnected, as if borrowed from someone else's life. Only the phone call was clear. The nurse, Brenda something. When he tried to grasp the name, it slid away, dissolving like mist between his fingers. The memories unraveled like smoke. Had he even spoken to the nurse, or had the call come from somewhere else entirely? The details refused to stay still, shifting and blurring the harder he tried to hold them. Time, he realized now, did not behave the same way here. "Tell me about the accident," the old man said. His voice didn't reach Mark's ears so much as it appeared inside his thoughts. Calm, patient. "Your son's accident." The old man gestured toward the overlook. A car stood there now, one that hadn't existed moments earlier. A silver Camry, whole, untouched. The same car Mark had driven, restored as if the crash had never happened. "You drive," the old man said simply. Mark understood. "When you see someone who needs a ride," the old man continued, "someone making their own desperate journey, you stop. You listen. You help them understand. And when the moment comes, you help them choose their destination." Mark walked toward the car. His footsteps made no sound. The keys waited in the ignition, exactly where he'd left them in life. But this wasn't the same road. This wasn't the same car. This place existed beside the world, not within it. He paused, turning back. "Will I see them again?" he asked Danny Carroll. "Eventually," the old man said, "but not for a long time. If you accept this path, they must finish their own journeys first. Their lives are not done." Mark nodded. It wasn't really a decision. It was recognition. All his life he had been this man, the one who showed up, who carried the weight, who drove through storms to reach someone who needed him. Death hadn't changed that. It had only clarified it. He climbed into the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, the old man stood at the edge of the overlook, a still figure against a sky that was finally clearing. Then the fog rolled in again, thick and merciful, swallowing him from sight. Mark pulled onto the highway. The speedometer read 0. Yet for the first time, he felt perfectly paced. Behind him, the crash site faded away, becoming just another quiet tragedy on a road that had claimed many. Ahead, the fog thickened as the road climbed back toward the pass. This time, Mark didn't fight it. He was part of it now. Somewhere on that mountain road, another soul would soon realize they were lost, terrified, and running out of time. And when they did, Mark would be there, engine humming, headlights cutting through the mist, ready to give them a ride. Time passed. Minutes, hours, years. It no longer mattered. The road stretched on, winding through mountains that existed both in the world of the living and somewhere just beyond it. And Mark drove on. Beyond death, time had no authority. Minutes and years dissolved into the same meaningless fog. What remained was purpose, and Mark's had settled into him with a calm certainty. Then he saw the headlights. They cut through the mist from the opposite direction, climbing toward the pass far too fast. The car swayed slightly, tires fighting the slick asphalt. Mark recognized it instantly. The speed, the tension, the invisible clock ticking inside the driver's chest. Someone running toward love or away from loss. Mark pulled to the shoulder and waited. The car, a red Honda Civic, roared past without slowing. For a brief instant, Mark saw the driver, a young woman no older than 25. Tears streaked her face. Her hands were locked white around the steering wheel. Her lips moved silently, forming prayers or promises or bargains no one should have to make. Mark eased back onto the road, and followed at a distance. He already knew how this would end. The Civic hit black ice on a sharp curve. There was no drama in it, just the brutal, indifferent mechanics of physics. A fishtail, an overcorrection, the hollow sound of metal striking guardrail. Then the car vanished. It flipped down the embankment, crashing through trees before coming to rest upside down. Steam rose from the hood. The headlights stayed on, throwing wild shadows across the forest. Mark stopped and walked to the edge of the road. Below him lay the wreckage, silent still. Soon sirens would come, flashing lights, procedures, reports. But her journey in the physical world had ended the moment her tires lost grip. Mark waited. She appeared near the tree line, no more than 20 feet from the car, standing barefoot on pine needles, wearing jeans and a faded college sweatshirt, staring at the ruin below with hollow disbelief. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Her voice carried the same refusal Mark had once felt, the mind's last defense against the unbearable. He approached slowly. "Are you hurt?" Mark asked gently. She spun toward him, eyes wide, fear and confusion warring across her face. "Where did you come from? Did you see it?" Her breath hitched. "We need to call 911. I have to get to the hospital, my mom." Her voice collapsed in on itself. Mark nodded, grounding her with his calm. "What's your name?" "Emily," she said, barely audible. "That's a good name," Mark said. "Emily, you were trying to reach someone." She nodded desperately. "She had a stroke. They said I needed to get there fast." Mark glanced once toward the wreckage, then back at her. "You were brave to try," he said. Her brow furrowed. "Why are you talking like that?" Mark gestured toward the road above, where his silver car waited, headlights glowing softly through the fog. "Come with me," he said. "I'll give you a ride." She hesitated, then nodded because hope is stubborn even after death. As they walked toward the car, the fog thickened again, wrapping the mountain in silence. Another journey had begun, and Mark drove on. "Jessica," she said softly. "Jessica Lou." She glanced once more at the wreckage, then back at Mark, confusion sharpening into fear. "Who are you? How did you get down here so fast?" Mark chose his words with care. "I'm someone who understands what you're going through, someone who's made a similar journey." She shook her head hard as if she could physically dislodge his words. "I'm not going through anything, I'm fine. My car crashed, that's all. I just need to get out of here." Her voice cracked. "I need to get to Sacramento. My mom," she stopped, her face folding in on itself. "She's dying, cancer. The doctor said she might not make it through the night." The ache hit Mark instantly. He knew this road. Another child driving too fast through dangerous darkness, believing love could outrun fate. "Tell me about her," Mark said. Jessica stared at him. "What? We don't have time for that." "Tell me about your mother." Something in his tone, steady, patient, unhurried, cut through her panic. She swallowed hard. "She's the strongest person I know," Jessica said. "She raised me alone after my dad left, worked 2 jobs to put me through college, never complained, never asked anyone for help." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "She's a nurse. I see you at UC Davis. She's been fighting this cancer for 2 years, but it spread. The doctors said there's nothing else they can do." As she spoke, her voice steadied, as if saying the words out loud might somehow keep her mother anchored to the world. "But she's tough," Jessica added quickly. "She's not giving up, she's waiting for me." Mark understood. He had told himself the same lie once, that his presence could change the outcome, that love alone could rewrite the ending. How far were you from Sacramento when the accident happened? He asked. Jessica looked around, trying to make sense of the trees, the slope, the impossible quiet. I don't know, maybe an hour. I was making good time even with the fog. I just needed to. She stopped studying him now. Suspicion crept into her eyes. Why aren't you calling for help? Why aren't we trying to get me out of here? Mark gestured toward the wreckage below. Look again, Jessica. Really look. She turned. Mark watched her face as the truth forced its way in. The Honda was destroyed, crushed, folded, torn apart in ways no human body could survive. Steam drifted upward, but there was no movement, no door open, no sign of escape. That's impossible, she whispered. I was wearing my seat belt, the airbag. Her voice faded as the last defenses of denial began to crumble. The mountain remained silent. The airbag deployed, Jessica said slowly. I remember that. Her voice drifted, turning inward. I remember the steering wheel going loose. The car started spinning. She swallowed. There was this moment, just one, when I knew I was going to hit something, and all I could think about was my mom, about how I wasn't going to make it in time. Her breathing grew shallow, then everything went white. Mark didn't interrupt. He remembered this part well, the mind replaying fragments, searching for a loophole, a missed detail that might undo the truth. But I'm standing here, Jessica said suddenly, panic seeping back in. I'm talking to you, I'm alive. Yes, Mark said gently. You are, just not in the way you were before. She looked at him, then at her hands, then back down at the wreckage. Mark saw the moment it clicked. The color drained from her face. Her knees bent slightly, as if the ground had lost its solidity. I'm dead, she said, flat and stunned. Your body is, Mark corrected softly, but you're still here, still you. But my mom, her voice cracked. She'll understand, Mark said. She's a nurse. She knows these roads. She knows what fog and speed can do. She'll know you died trying to reach her. Jessica shook her head, fierce and desperate. She'll blame herself. She'll think if she hadn't gotten sick, if she hadn't needed me. Did she ask you to come? Mark asked. No, the word barely made it out. She told me to stay in school, told me not to worry, but I couldn't just sit there knowing she was dying. I had to try. Mark nodded. Love does that. It makes us do things that don't make sense to anyone else. It makes us drive roads we shouldn't, push limits we shouldn't, believe that arriving will somehow change the ending. Jessica studied him now, her fear replaced by something sharper, more observant. You're like me, she said. You died trying to reach someone you loved. My son, Mark said. Motorcycle accident. I was racing from Phoenix to Reno when I lost control in the fog. Did you make it? She asked. Before the accident. No, he paused, but I learned something along the way. What? Sometimes the attempt matters more than the outcome, Mark said. Sometimes love isn't about fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's just about showing up, about trying. Jessica looked toward the road, where the silence would soon be broken by sirens and flashing lights. What happens now? She asked quietly. Do I just disappear? Mark didn't answer right away. He already knew the road would answer for him. That choice belongs to you, Mark said softly, hearing his own voice echo words once given to him. Some people stay close to what they loved, listening to familiar places, watching over the ones they left behind. Some move forward into whatever waits beyond this road. And some, he nodded toward the car resting at the edge of the highway, engine quiet but ready. Some choose to stay and help. to guide the next soul who's driving too fast, loving too hard, and doesn't yet know where their road truly ends. Jessica stood still, absorbing it. Far below, the distant wail of sirens rose through the trees, the sound of help racing toward a moment that had already passed. "My mom will be okay," Jessica said suddenly. Her voice was steady now, certain. Mark looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because she's stronger than this," Jessica said. "Stronger than cancer, stronger than losing me." She swallowed, then lifted her chin. "She'll grieve, but she won't stop living. She'll keep helping people, keep showing up. That's who she is. That's what she taught me, that love means doing everything you can, even when it isn't enough." A quiet smile touched Mark's face. "You understand?" "I think I do." Jessica met his eyes. This journey was never really about reaching her bedside, was it? It was about proving that nothing, not distance, not fear, not even death, could stop me from trying to be there for her. She straightened, and in that moment Mark saw the strength she'd been talking about, standing tall inside her. "And now," Jessica continued, calm and resolute, "I help others understand the same thing. That love doesn't end just because life does." Together they walked back toward the road. As they climbed the last few steps, Jessica's car appeared beside Mark's, the red sedan whole again, waiting patiently, as if it had always been meant for this. At the overlook stood the old man, unchanged, timeless. He watched them with quiet approval and gave a small nod, the way a teacher does when a lesson has finally settled where it belongs. "How long have you been doing this?" Jessica asked as she reached her door. Mark considered the question. "I don't really know. Time doesn't behave the same way here. Maybe hours, maybe years. All I know is this: every journey matters. Every person who dies trying to reach someone they love deserves to have that love seen, acknowledged." Jessica got into her car, the engine humming softly. "So, where do we go now?" "We drive," Mark said simply, "and we watch." As if the road itself had been listening, headlights appeared through the fog ahead. Another car climbing too fast, weaving slightly, propelled by fear and devotion in equal measure. Mark and Jessica eased onto the highway, one on each side of the lane, moving with quiet purpose. The night closed around them, thick with fog and meaning, and somewhere ahead, another story was about to begin. They were young, and the mountains showed no mercy. Wet pavement, blind curves, thin air, and thinner margins for error. Somewhere ahead, another life was rushing toward an ending it could not yet see. But this time, no one would meet that ending alone. Behind them, at the edge of sight, the old man lingered for just a moment. His work, for this night at least, was finished. A faint smile crossed his face before his form dissolved into the fog, leaving the crossing point exactly as it had always been: silent, watchful, patient, waiting. Mark continued forward into the dark. He was no longer someone being carried by the road. He was its keeper now, a guide, one who met people at the moment when love pushed them beyond reason and fear blinded them to danger. He helped them slow down, not always in speed, but in understanding. This was the true passage, from panic to clarity, from clinging to acceptance, from the fragile limits of the body to the enduring weight of meaning. Far away, in a quiet hospital room in Sacramento, a woman weakened by illness stared at her phone as it rang unanswered. She would never see her daughter walk through the door, but she would feel her, later, in ways that defied logic, in dreams, in sudden warmth, in the unshakable certainty that she had been loved fiercely, completely, without hesitation. And in another hospital, miles away, A young man named Danny opened his eyes beneath bright lights and sterile ceilings. His voice was hoarse when he asked for his father. Nurses exchanged careful looks, unaware that Mark had already reached him, in the only way left, through sacrifice, through choice, through a final drive powered entirely by love. The roads went on, endless, folding through deserts and mountains, memory and mist, carrying people toward endings that were never truly ends. And Mark drove among them, a ferryman of the modern world, helping lost souls understand what the living so often forget, that the most important journeys are not counted in distance or time, but in how deeply we love when everything is at stake. The passenger was gone. The driver remained. And the journey went on. Story 2. Mother isn't acting like herself. The house remembered him, even if it pretended not to. Bennett felt it the moment he stepped inside, the subtle resistance in the air, the way the silence pressed inward instead of simply existing. He told himself it was nonsense. He stood in far worse places. Rooms where violence had screamed itself into the walls, floors that had soaked up blood and secrets alike. Still, this place felt different. The Henley residence sat quietly on a dull street, the kind of home people passed every day without looking twice. But inside, time felt stalled, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Bennett stood just beyond the threshold, his shoes planted on hardwood floors that should have groaned under his weight. They didn't. Yet he felt the creaks anyway, phantom vibrations traveling up through his legs, echoes from a childhood he no longer allowed himself to revisit. For 29 years, silence had been his world. Total, absolute, merciless silence. And yet here, memories of sound stirred like ghosts. Bennett Hartwell made his living dissecting the worst days of other people's lives. He wrote about murder, about families torn apart, about the anatomy of violence. He trusted evidence more than testimony. Blood told the truth. Patterns never lied. It was fitting, in a way. A man who couldn't hear had learned to see what others missed. The Henley case had pulled him across state lines. 4 dead, parents and 2 children, officially ruled a murder-suicide, unofficially unsettled. The detective's emails had been careful, vague, but between the lines Bennett had sensed unease. Small inconsistencies, details that refused to sit still. Standing in the living room where Susan Henley had died, Bennett felt the familiar prickle between his shoulder blades. The sensation of being observed. He dismissed it immediately. The house had been locked down for weeks. The investigation was over. No officers, no neighbors, just him, the evidence, and the quiet. The floors were old, original oak from the 1940s, polished smooth by decades of ordinary life. They should have been beautiful. Instead, dark shapes stained the wood in places where bodies had been found. Bennett had studied the photographs extensively, but being here changed something. The stains felt heavier in person, as if they were still wet in some unseen way. His chest tightened. He drifted through the house, camera untouched. Something was guiding him, though he couldn't have explained what. A pull, a wrongness. It led him to the smallest bedroom. The moment he stepped inside, he knew this was the heart of it. Unlike the rest of the house, this room wasn't hardwood. The floor was covered in woven mats, grass fibers stretched over padding, arranged with meticulous care. The symmetry was almost ritualistic, edges aligned, angles precise. Almost. At the center of the room, one mat sat crooked. Just slightly, enough to be noticeable, enough to matter. Its corner was lifted, as if someone had peeled it back and then thought better of it. The police photos had captured it exactly like this. The reports noted it as unexplained. No sign of forced entry. No reason for disturbance. But Bennett's instincts flared. This wasn't random. He crouched down, studying the map. The discoloration stood out immediately, darkened patches that looked like water damage, though nothing else in the room showed similar wear. The stain followed no natural spill pattern. It was contained, intentional. The pattern was wrong. Not just visually, structurally, as if the room itself rejected the mat's presence. Bennett reached out, fingers hovering over the raised corner. His pulse quickened. He didn't know why his hand was trembling. He had examined hundreds of crime scenes. He had uncovered truths others couldn't bear to face. But this felt personal, though he'd never been here before. Slowly, he lifted the mat. The air beneath it felt colder. Not damp, not moldy. Cold. Beneath the padding, etched into the wooden subfloor, was a shape. No, several shapes. Lines carved with obsessive precision, overlapping into a symbol that made Bennett's breath catch. It wasn't random. It wasn't decorative. It was a pattern meant to be hidden. His stomach twisted as understanding began to take shape. This wasn't a crime scene that told a story after the fact. This was a room where something had been prepared. And suddenly, the title of the article he'd been assigned felt dangerously wrong. This wasn't about what happened to the Henley family. This was about what they had lived with. Bennett straightened slowly, the weight of the house pressing down on him harder now. The silence felt alert, watchful. For the first time since he'd arrived, a thought crept in, quiet, unwelcome, undeniable. The police had been looking at the wrong person. And whatever had gone wrong with Mother had started long before anyone died. The moment his phone vibrated against his leg, Bennett knew the world had just shifted. The pattern of the alert felt urgent, insistent, almost pleading. He glanced down. Message from his sister: "Dad, he's gone. Heart attack. Funeral arrangements pending. Come home, Catherine." The words hovered in the air, heavy and unreal. Dad, Harold Hartwell, the man who had raised him alone after their mother died, the man who had learned sign language in his 40s just to speak to a deaf boy, the man who had never made Bennett feel different, who had made the world feel manageable even when it had been anything but. Bennett sank back onto the floorboards, the skewed mat in Bakersfield now forgotten. The Henley house, with its shadows and stains and whispered secrets, faded behind him, replaced by a new weight, the oppressive stillness of his childhood home, the house on Cedar Street in Millfield where every corner remembered Harold. The drive back cut through hours of Central California sunlight, rows of almonds and grapevines flickering past like ghosts in his peripheral vision. He hadn't made this trip in years, only for birthdays, holidays, or the rare times his father had hinted at heart trouble. And yet, approaching the town limits, the familiar tightening in his chest returned, a pressure in his lungs, a reminder that some places never truly release you. Millfield had barely changed. The streets were lined with the same trees, the lawns the same shade of trimmed green, the houses solid and modest as always. Yet the house on Cedar Street seemed smaller, worn, slightly off balance. White paint peeled here and there, the garden his father had tended now showed neglect. Catherine's car was parked in the driveway. She must have been waiting, because even before he shut off the engine, the front door opened. "Bennett," she called. She didn't sign, though she always tried. Her voice carried the exhaustion of grief, the kind that seeps into your bones, making every gesture deliberate, every step measured. Bennett stepped inside, pulling her into a brief embrace, inhaling the familiar scent of lavender, mingled with the intangible residue of absence. He signed softly, "I'm sorry I wasn't here," She nodded, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. "He went quickly," she said aloud, words he couldn't hear but could read on her lips. "The doctor said very quickly. He was proud of you, you know." The house breathed differently without Harold. Not empty, but tense, like a held breath. Bennett had always felt the atmosphere in a room, every vibration, every shift of energy amplified in ways others could not perceive. And now, the familiar spaces felt subtly wrong. The kitchen drawers weren't fully closed, books nudged forward on the shelves, slight disorder that whispered someone had been rifling through the house. He signed and spoke aloud. Was Dad looking for something? The house, it's different. Catherine frowned. "I noticed it last week when I came by. He said he was going through old papers, putting things in order, but this wasn't him. You know how precise he was." Bennett nodded. Precision had been Harold's signature. Every photo labeled, every document perfectly filed, every piece of paper in the desk in the study exactly where it belonged. If Harold had been searching, he had a reason, and it mattered. The study awaited him upstairs, a small room overlooking the backyard, a sanctuary his father had claimed after Bennett's mother passed. Bills, letters, decades of quiet order. Bennett hadn't been in this room for years. Now standing in the doorway, that familiar itch between his shoulder blades returned. Something in the room felt wrong. The furniture was in place. The desk beneath the window, the cabinet in the corner, the bookshelf along the east wall. But a gap caught his eye. Something was missing. "Catherine," he called softly, voice carrying, "come here." His sister appeared quickly, concern etching her face. Together, they stared at the empty space, the silence of the room suddenly oppressive, alive with secrets that waited to be discovered. And in that moment, Bennett knew the careful, measured world his father had maintained had shifted. Something had been sought, something had been found, and the truth Harold had chased to the very end was still waiting, somewhere in the shadows of that study, ready to reveal itself. Bennett called softly, his hands moving with practiced ease, trying to communicate even when his voice faltered. Catherine appeared at the bottom of the stairs almost immediately, her expression wary but attentive. He gestured toward the empty corner beside the filing cabinet. "What was here?" he asked, eyes fixed on the gap. "There used to be something." She frowned, tracing her memory. "Oh, the cedar chest. Your mother. Harold moved it last month, said he wanted to go through it properly. I helped him carry it up to the attic." A cold weight settled in Bennett's stomach. That chest had always been a fixture in that corner, a quiet sentinel of his family's past. He had never touched it, never asked about its contents. Wedding dress, baby clothes, old photographs, personal treasures, sacred remnants of a life long gone. And now it had vanished from its place, carried away without warning. "Did he say why?" Bennett asked, his hands tightening into fists. "Something about making sure you got what was important," Catherine said slowly. "He'd been thinking about legacy, about putting things in order for you. But he seemed agitated, not just sentimental. He kept asking questions about things from before you were born, things I barely remembered myself." The attic door loomed at the end of the narrow hallway, low and unwelcoming. Bennett ducked under the frame and climbed the steep wooden stairs, the beam from his phone dancing across the walls, revealing decades of dust and shadow. The smell hit him immediately. Old wood, dry rot, and something earthy, like fallen leaves forgotten in the rain. There in the center of the attic sat the cedar chest. Red cedar, brass fittings now tinged with a soft green patina. The top was slightly ajar, as if inviting him in, daring him to uncover its secrets. His pulse quickened as he knelt before it, breath catching in his throat. Inside, the expected treasures greeted him first. His mother's wedding dress, folded with care and wrapped in yellow tissue. Tiny baby clothes, his own, untouched by time. Albums chronicling a love story that had ended too soon. But beneath these familiar layers, wrapped in an aged sheet, something else waited. Something impossible. A section of flooring, not just ordinary wood, but a square of woven mat, roughly 2 feet across. Its edges had been cut with precision, as though someone had deliberately removed it to hide it or protect something hidden beneath. Bennett's hands hovered over the strange piece, a shiver running down his spine. He knew, deep in his bones, that whatever lay beneath this mat was more than memory or heirloom. It was a secret his father had sought, and perhaps a truth that had waited decades for him to find. The fragment had been cut with intention, not torn or broken, but carefully separated from a larger whole. The weave was unmistakable, dry grass fibers bound tight, identical to the mat Bennett had seen in the other house weeks earlier. This one was older, its edges softened by time, its surface discolored by a deep, shadowy stain that had soaked so thoroughly into the fibers it felt permanent, like a memory that refused to fade. Bennett's hands trembled as he lifted the square from the chest. Underneath lay the real weight of what his father had hidden. Loose papers, envelopes, photographs. The handwriting was immediately familiar, his father's precise, disciplined script, but the content made his chest tight. The photographs were black and white, slightly curled at the corners, their surfaces worn thin by handling. They showed this house, but not as Bennett remembered it. The rooms looked newer, brighter, rearranged, younger. He turned one over, a date written faintly in pencil. 1985. The year he was born. His fingers slipped, and the mat piece fell from his grasp. The photograph beneath it stole the air from his lungs. It was the living room downstairs, but the furniture was different. The walls were bare where pictures should have been, and standing near the window was a man Bennett had never seen before. Tall, dark-haired, relaxed in a way Harold had never been. His arm was wrapped around a woman who looked unmistakably like Bennett's mother, yet not quite. Her posture was looser, her smile unguarded, as if she were someone who had not yet learned how to brace herself against loss. On the back of the photo, 3 words were written. Donna and Cliff, New Year's Day. Cliff, not Harold. Bennett's breathing grew shallow as he dug through the rest. More photos of the same man, sometimes alone, sometimes beside his mother, and in several there was a child. A small boy, dark hair, wide eyes. A boy who might have been Bennett. But something about the child felt wrong, or rather too right. His gaze was sharp, attentive, turned toward something beyond the frame, as if he were reacting to a sound Bennett himself could no longer access. That child could hear. The letters were harder to read in the dim attic light, but the meaning bled through regardless. They were written by his father, addressed to a woman named Ruth. They spoke of an incident, of fear, of a decision that could not be undone. Repeated mentions of that night, of keeping the boy safe, of protecting him from what he might remember. One sentence had been underlined twice, pressed so hard the pencil nearly tore the page. He doesn't remember, and that's for the best. The trauma was too much. Dr. Peterson believes the hearing loss may be psychosomatic, but protective. Bennett dropped the letters. The attic seemed to tilt. Psychosomatic trauma protection. A sensation rose from somewhere deep inside him. Not an image, not a thought, but a feeling. The echo of something long buried. The last sound he could ever recall hearing clearly. It was night. He was in bed. Voices downstairs. Angry voices. Raised, sharp, colliding. Then the crash of something heavy, furniture overturned, glass shattering. And then, nothing. Not quiet. Absence. A silence so absolute it swallowed everything that came after. The kitchen felt smaller, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were leaning in. Bennett's hands gripped the counter so tightly his knuckles ached, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from Catherine. Her movements had stopped, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound filling the space. "I need to know," Bennett said, his voice breaking the careful control he tried to maintain. "Cliff, tell me everything." Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she lowered the plate she'd been carrying. Her face was pale, drawn, the weight of decades pressing down on her. She opened her mouth, hesitated, and then exhaled slowly, as though releasing a lifetime of secrets. "Cliff," she said, and Bennett could see every syllable on her lips, the words forming with painstaking clarity. "Cliff was your father, your real father." Bennett's stomach lurched. His knees felt weak. The room wavered in front of him, and the edges of the countertop seemed to ripple. "Impossible," he whispered. Harold is my father." "Harold was your uncle," Catherine replied, voice soft but unwavering. "Cliff's brother. He married your mother after everything. He raised you as his own because your mother wanted stability. She wanted you safe." Bennett's mind spun, trying to piece together fragments of memory that didn't fit. He saw glimpses of his childhood flash before him. The quiet discipline of Harold, the small gestures of care, the absence of certain faces he had assumed he'd forgotten. "Tell me what happened," he demanded. "I need to know." Catherine sank into the chair beside the counter, her frailty suddenly visible. She folded her hands in her lap, and the lines of her face deepened as she began. "Your mother and Cliff, they were married first. For a time it was happy, but he had demons, drinking, gambling, women. She tried to make it work, but by the time you were 3, she couldn't anymore. She was planning to leave, take you, start over somewhere else." Bennett swallowed hard, every word like a stone in his chest. His eyes burned, but he refused to blink, refusing to look away. "What happened?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Catherine's lips trembled. There was a fight, a terrible fight. She packed her things. She planned to drive to her sister in Oregon. Cliff came home drunk, found the suitcases. Harold was there too. He had tried to. Her voice faltered, swallowed by memory. She shook her head slowly, as if chasing something away that threatened to break her entirely. It didn't go as anyone wanted. Bennett felt a chill slide down his spine, the puzzle pieces clicking together in a picture far darker than he had ever imagined. He wanted to look away, to run, but he couldn't. Not now. Not after 30 years of silence, of gaps in memory that were suddenly screaming the truth. And in that moment, he understood why he had never remembered, why the world had seemed to mute itself for him when he was 3, why certain sounds, certain moments had been locked away. The truth was louder than life itself, and it had waited all this time for him to listen. Bennett's hands trembled as the weight of her words sank in. He felt like the floor beneath him had turned to water, ready to swallow him whole. "Out of hand?" he asked, voice barely audible. "What do you mean?" Catherine's eyes closed for a moment as though summoning courage from the depths of memory. "Cliff, he attacked your mother. Harold tried to stop him, but Cliff was bigger, stronger. There was a fight in the living room. You were upstairs, hiding, but you saw it. You saw him kill your mother." The words struck Bennett like a lightning bolt to the chest. His knees buckled, the room spun. "No, Harold killed my mother." Catherine's gaze snapped back to him, fierce and unflinching. "No, Cliff killed your mother. Harold killed Cliff in self-defense. He tried to protect you, tried to protect her, but it was too late for Donna." Bennett's world fractured. The car accident, the story he'd carried for 32 years, it was all a lie. His father had built a fortress of falsehood around him, one meant to shield him from horror too cruel for a child's mind. "You lied to me," he whispered, voice breaking. "For 32 years you lied to me." Catherine shook her head, tears glinting in the dim light. "He loved you. He sacrificed everything for you. He changed his life, learned to communicate with you, devoted every moment to being the father you needed. He wasn't lying to hurt you. He was protecting you from something no child should ever witness." Bennett turned away, staggering toward the counter, his thoughts spinning like a storm. Every certainty he had carried, his childhood, his identity, his deafness, the life he had built, was founded on deception. The hearing loss, the silence, the isolation, all of it traced back to that single night, hidden under carefully constructed lies. Yet even as his mind grappled with this truth, memories surfaced. The photographs in the cedar chest, the worn and stained mat, the rooms that had always unsettled him without reason. Where did it happen?" he asked, voice shaking. Catherine hesitated, her brows knitting together. "Where do you mean?" "The house," Bennett said, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Cliff and Mom, where exactly?" Her shoulders slumped. "The study, what later became Harold's study. Before that, it was your mother's sewing room." Bennett's stomach clenched, icy fingers crawling up to his chest. "The floor, what kind of flooring? What was in that room?" Catherine stared at him, her expression taut with unease. I can't remember exactly. Some kind of mats, Bennett's heart pounded as the pieces began to align. The mat in the cedar chest, the hidden section of flooring, the shadows of the past pressed against him, whispering truths he had spent a lifetime trying to forget. And now, finally, the silence of 32 years was breaking, revealing the horror and love interwoven at the heart of his life. Bennett felt the last piece lock into place, the woven mats, the damaged floor, the careful concealment. Without another word, he turned and moved for the stairs. Behind him, Catherine followed, her mouth forming questions, warnings, pleas, but he didn't slow. He climbed with the steady certainty of someone being pulled by gravity, each step landing exactly where it needed to. The second-floor hallway stretched ahead, unchanged, familiar, and suddenly hostile. The study door stood closed, just as it always had. That door had been a boundary his entire life, a quiet rule that was never spoken but always obeyed. This room belonged to his father alone. Bennett had never crossed that line, not as a child, not as an adult. He had accepted the unease without understanding it. Now he opened the door. The room greeted him with perfect order, desk under the window, filing cabinet in the corner, books lined with deliberate symmetry. Nothing appeared disturbed, nothing appeared wrong. But Bennett wasn't looking at it as a son anymore. He was looking at it as an investigator. The hardwood floor gleamed, polished and warm in color, matching the rest of the house. Yet beneath the surface, patterns revealed themselves, subtle, deliberate, undeniable, faint rectangular impressions, each one uniform, each one placed with precision, the ghost of something once installed, then erased. He lowered himself to the center of the room and pressed his palms flat against the floor. The wood was smooth, finished, immaculate. And wrong. There was a softness beneath the surface, a barely perceptible give, as if the floor itself remembered what had soaked into it long ago, as if it had absorbed something it could never fully release. The silence here was not empty. It was crowded. It pressed in on him, thick with moments that had never truly left. Bennett found himself holding his breath instinctively, like a child afraid to make noise while hiding. And then the memory came. Not an image, not a sound. A feeling. Small, crouched, heart racing. Fingers dug into woven fibers as he hid behind a cracked door, peering through a narrow gap. The room was larger then, louder, full of motion. Two men struggling. His mother stepping between them. A shout he could not hear, but felt. A sudden, violent movement. His mother falling. And towering over her, the larger man, Cliff, his real father, lifting something heavy with both hands. The motion froze in Bennett's mind, suspended in endless repetition. The impact never faded. Bennett gasped and pulled his hands from the floor as if burned. The room did not react. It didn't need to. It had already spoken. This wasn't just a study. It was a burial site, not of bodies, but of truth. A place where love had collided with violence, where protection had required secrecy, and where a terrified child had paid the price by losing his hearing to survive what his mind could not. Harold hadn't just raised him. He had carried this room, this floor, this silence. For decades. Bennett stood slowly, the weight of the past settling into him with crushing clarity. His life, his silence, his career, Everything had been shaped by a single moment hidden beneath polished wood and good intentions. The house creaked softly around him, and for the first time, Bennett understood why. Watching it unfold in his mind, Bennett felt the horror of that night replay in vivid, unbearable detail. Harold, younger and frantic, had fought with a ferocity born of love and fear, every movement a desperate attempt to protect both mother and child. The crashes, the thuds, the splintering of wood beneath the weight of bodies, all of it etched itself into Bennett's memory as though his mind refused to forget what his ears never could hear. And then the silence came. Not emptiness, but a finality that pressed into him like a living thing. Opened his eyes. The hardwood near the bookshelf looked flawless, polished, indistinguishable from the rest. But his trained gaze didn't deceive him. Something was buried here, something that no amount of sanding or varnish could erase. 2 lives had ended here. Blood had soaked into the woven mats, the fibers absorbing more than just physical evidence, absorbing grief, terror, and the weight of choices made in desperation. Every mat Harold had removed, every piece hidden away, had been a silent testament. All except one fragment, tucked away in his mother's cedar chest, a hidden relic of truth, a confession preserved in red cedar. Bennett rose unsteadily to his feet. Now he knew why this room had always felt wrong. Why childhood instincts had warned him away even before he could comprehend why. It was the epicenter of his life's rupture, the place where innocence had been shattered, and the sound of his own world had been ripped away forever. But understanding brought no comfort. If anything, the revelation made the silence heavier, as though it were swollen with the things that could never be spoken, forgiven, or reclaimed. He turned, intending to leave, and found Catherine in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. He didn't need words to read her message. He never forgave himself. Bennett's throat tightened. He saw it clearly now. Harold had borne the weight of that night alone for 32 years, saving him while carrying an unbearable guilt. He had protected Bennett from a man who would have destroyed them both. Yet Harold's heart had never released the grief for his own failure to save Donna. Bennett nodded, silent. He understood why Harold had lied. Not cruelty, not weakness, but love. A desperate, imperfect attempt to preserve a childhood and a life free from the trauma that had already carved deep scars. "There's one more thing," Catherine whispered, breaking the hush. Her hand extended, offering a cream-colored envelope, edges slightly worn, his name scrawled in Harold's careful script. Bennett took it, hands trembling, fingers brushing the neat, deliberate writing. He opened it. Inside were pages, Harold's handwriting spilling across them with measured precision. "Bennett," it began, "if you're reading this, then Catherine has told you the truth about what happened to your mother and father. I know this knowledge will hurt, and I know it will change how you see everything. Your life, your past, your own story. But you must know this. Every choice I made, every secret I kept was to protect you, even if it cost me my peace. I cannot undo the pain, but I can leave you with the truth, and with the hope that you might find the life I wanted for you all along." The letter burned in his hand before he even finished the first paragraph. Bennett felt it immediately, that heavy pull in the chest, the kind that warned him the truth was about to land hard. His father's handwriting was steady, careful, almost gentle, as if the words themselves were afraid of what they carried. Harold wrote that he had never meant to leave Bennett with unanswered questions. He wrote that some truths grow sharp with time and others grow dangerous. This one, he admitted, had been both. Cliff, the man whose name Bennett had only just learned, had not begun as a monster. Once, he had been charming, ambitious, full of plans. The kind of man people trusted easily. But something dark lived beneath that surface, something that fed on anger and loss. Over the years, it took over completely, until the man Bennett's mother loved no longer existed. Harold made it clear he wasn't asking for sympathy. Violence had no excuse, but blood was complicated. Bennett carried both light and shadow in him, and Harold wanted him to know this. Darkness is not destiny. A man is more than the worst thing someone with his blood has done. Then the letter shifted. Harold confessed what he had never allowed himself to hope. The doctors once believed Bennett's silence was not permanent. Trauma, they said, can lock doors the body never meant to keep closed. With the right help, those doors might open again. Harold had never pursued it. Not because he didn't want Bennett to hear, but because he feared what sound might bring back with it. Now that choice belonged to Bennett alone. The letter grew softer near the end, almost apologetic. Harold admitted he had hidden something, kept it close when he should have destroyed it. A piece of woven flooring from that room, the room where everything shattered. He didn't know why he kept it. Guilt, maybe, or the belief that one day Bennett would be strong enough to face the truth without it destroying him. And then came the line that made Bennett's skin go cold. Harold wrote that sometimes, late at night, he thought the mat still remembered, that the fibers held more than stains, that voices sometimes crept into the quiet, his wife's, broken and afraid, and Cliff's, twisted with rage. Harold told himself it was grief speaking, but he was never entirely sure. The letter ended simply. Love, pride, regret. Bennett read it twice, then once more. The idea that his silence might not be permanent left him dizzy, but the thought of that mat, of something still alive inside it, sent a deeper chill through him. He had spent years studying crime, trauma, the strange ways violence refuses to stay buried. He knew better than most that some events leave impressions no cleanup can erase. Catherine was watching him from across the room, her eyes full of concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. Bennett considered the question honestly. His father was gone. His past had been rewritten. His identity cracked open, and somewhere above them sat a fragment of a night that had stolen his childhood. "No," he said quietly, "but I will be." She nodded, accepting that answer the way only someone who had lived long enough could. What now? He didn't have a plan. He could return to his work, to other people's horrors, while learning how to carry his own. He could explore the possibility of hearing again, though the thought terrified him more than silence ever had. "But first," he said, standing, "I need to see something." The attic stairs felt steeper this time. He climbed them slowly, every step heavy with anticipation. The cedar chest waited where he had left it, its contents scattered like evidence frozen mid-investigation. The piece of woven mat lay among old photographs and yellowed papers. Up close there was no mistaking it. The stain was old blood, rust-dark and deeply set. The edges were cleanly cut, precise. This wasn't torn away in panic. It had been preserved. Bennett crouched beside it, shining his phone's light across the fibers. That's when the silence changed. Not broken, altered. For the first time in decades, the absence around him felt crowded, dense, as if something unseen had leaned closer. He reached out. The moment his fingers touched the mat, sensation surged through him. Not sound, not exactly, but vibration. Raw and overwhelming. It bypassed his ears entirely, flooding straight into his bones. Emotion slammed into him. Fear, rage, desperation. A woman's presence, pleading, shaking. A man's fury, slurred, violent, uncontrollable. Another voice, young, terrified, begging for mercy. The world reeled as the echoes tore through him, not heard, but felt with unbearable clarity. Bennett pulled his hand back, gasping. The attic returned to stillness, but it wasn't empty anymore. He knew then that some truths never fade. They wait. They press themselves into wood, into memory, into blood, until someone is finally ready to listen. And for the first time in his life, Bennett understood that silence had never meant absence. It had meant survival. Eyes meeting his, with a mix of worry and resignation. Bennett's hand still trembled as he set the mat and photographs on the table. He didn't speak at first. The weight of what he'd just experienced pressed down on him. Heavy, undeniable, a silence so loud it rattled his bones. I felt it, he finally said, his voice low, rough with disbelief. Everything, every sound, every moment. It was like the night itself was reaching through the fibers, telling me what happened. Catherine nodded slowly, as though she had always known this day would come. That's why Harold hid it, she said softly. He couldn't bear for you to know, not yet. Not until he knew you could survive it. Bennett sank into the chair across from her, staring at the mat. The dried blood, the precise edges, it was more than evidence. It was a witness, a voice frozen in time, and now it was speaking to him. I understand why he did it, Bennett whispered, more to himself than to her. He saved me, but at a cost. 32 years carrying guilt, and now it's mine too. Catherine reached out, placing a hand over his. You're not alone, you never were, but yes, it's your turn now. To hold the truth, to carry it, to decide what to do with it. Bennett's mind raced, looping through every scene he had ever documented, every crime he had ever investigated. The realization hit him. The world of violence he had spent decades dissecting wasn't just abstract. It had been personal. He had been drawn to certain cases, certain patterns, because they resonated deep in his own history. Trauma had a gravity all its own. And objects, he now understood, could be more than silent witnesses. They could be keepers of memory, carriers of emotion, vessels of horror and loss. He carefully wrapped the mat and photographs back in the old sheet. Reverence tempered his movements. This wasn't just evidence. This was history, his history, and it was sacred. Bennett looked up at Catherine, his expression resolute. I need to face this, he said, fully, and not just with words, with everything I am. She nodded, her lips pressing into a firm line. Then go, she said. See it again, feel it again. But remember, you don't have to do it alone. I'm here. He stood, gripping the railing as he ascended to the attic once more. Every step felt like walking through layers of time, each creak of the wood echoing with memory. The chest waited like a sentinel, silent, yet brimming with stories that demanded acknowledgement. Bennett knelt again, breathing shallow, heart hammering. The mat lay before him, its fibers still whispering, vibrating with the weight of the past. He touched it, fingers brushing the stains, feeling the tremors of lives lost, of violence that had forever changed everything. And in that moment, Bennett understood fully. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is memory. Silence is the echo of what cannot be spoken aloud. And he finally was listening. The attic seemed alive around him, not threatening but patient, expectant, waiting for him to accept what had always been his inheritance, the truth in its purest, most terrifying form. Bennett exhaled slowly, his shoulders heavy but steadier now. Whatever came next, he would meet it head-on, because now he knew, now he understood. And for the first time in his life, the past was no longer a mystery, only a story he was ready to carry. Her eyes searched his face, uneasy, sensing a decision already made. I'm heading back to California, Bennett said quietly. There's something unfinished out there. Catherine nodded, then hesitated. Before you go, what is it you need from me? Bennett took a breath. That night, he said, choosing each word carefully, you once told me I was hiding upstairs, that I saw it all. Do you know exactly where I was? The color drained from her face. Harold found you in the study closet, she replied after a moment. You crawled behind stacked boxes and wedged yourself so tightly we thought you were stuck. You wouldn't come out, not for hours. And when you finally did, her voice softened. You couldn't speak, not a single word. It was like something had taken your voice along with your hearing. Bennett nodded slowly. Another piece clicked into place. And the mats, he said. Do you remember anything about them? Catherine's gaze drifted, as if she were seeing the room the way it once was. They were beautiful, she said. Your mother had them custom made. Real woven grass, not imitation. She said they reminded her of a peaceful room she'd seen in a magazine, a place meant for calm. She loved how they changed the whole feeling of the house. Her expression darkened. After that night, Harold tore them out, every single one. He said he couldn't bear to see them again. He replaced them with hardwood so it would all look normal. But he kept one piece. I never understood why. Bennett did. That fragment wasn't just flooring. It was a witness, a confession Harold could never speak, a final link to the people who died there, and to the child Bennett had been before terror stole his hearing and reshaped his life. Catherine, Bennett said softly, I need you to promise me something. She stiffened. What is it? If something happens to me, he continued, if I don't come back from this case, I need you to destroy that map. Burn it, bury it, make sure no one ever touches it again. Alarm flashed across her face. Bennett, listen to yourself. What do you think is going to happen? I don't know, he admitted, but I'm starting to see patterns, stories that repeat themselves. What happened in this house all those years ago? It feels connected to what I've been investigating in Bakersfield. And I don't think it ends until someone follows it all the way through. Catherine reached for his hand, gripping it with unexpected strength. Don't go, she pleaded. Whatever you think you owe the past, it's not worth your life. Bennett squeezed her hand gently, a sad smile touching his face. I'm not chasing danger, he said. I'm trying to stop it for good. And in his chest, beneath the fear, something steady took hold, a quiet resolve. The past had found him once. This time, he was going to face it on his own terms. I'm not throwing my life away, he said quietly. I'm trying to reclaim it. I've spent decades carrying a story that was never truly mine, wearing guilt that didn't belong to me. I need to know who I am without all of that. He pressed a gentle kiss to Catherine's forehead, then turned before doubt could root him in place. The drive back to Bakersfield would take hours, but for the first time in a long while. Bennett didn't dread the road. Somewhere ahead waited the Henley house, the warped mat, the strange markings, the unanswered questions clinging to its walls like residue. As he loaded his car, his reflection flickered in the rear window. There was something different about him now, not just older but steadier, as if the weight he'd carried had finally shifted into purpose. For years, his life had felt like retreat, one careful step backward after another. Now, at last, he was moving toward something. The bundle of blood-darkened matting rested in the passenger seat, wrapped tight like a fragile relic. He didn't have to look at it to know it was there. Its presence pressed against his awareness the way an unblinking stare does across a crowded room. The highway opened before him, long and bare, pulling him toward answers he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But readiness no longer mattered. Need did, and he needed the ending to this story. In the mirror, the house on Cedar Street shrank into nothing, sealing its secrets back into stillness. Yet the quiet followed him, not hollow anymore, but dense with meaning, alive with potential. The drive blurred into a strange, focused trance. Sound meant nothing. Everything else sharpened. The hum of the engine through the wheel, the warmth of late afternoon light sliding across the dashboard, the steady pressure of the wrapped matting beside him, heavy as a living thing at rest. Twice he pulled into rest stops, not for fuel or hunger, but because the intensity inside him threatened to spill over. At the second stop, somewhere past Fresno, Bennett unwrapped the matting and laid it across his legs. Under the harsh white lights of the parking lot, it looked harmless, just old flooring, worn and stained by time. He placed his palm against it. That familiar sensation returned. Not sound, but something close enough to make his bones hum. Echoes buried deep in fiber and blood and fear. Voices that had waited more than 3 decades to be felt again. People passed by his car, slowing, staring. A man alone in a parked vehicle, hands pressed to what looked like a piece of carpet. It was unsettling. Bennett didn't care. Normal had cost him too much already. Bennett had spent his life moving through carefully crafted lies, and now he was done with them. The road to Bakersfield stretched behind him as the sun dipped behind the Sierra Nevada, bleeding the sky in bruised shades of orange and violet that made his stomach twist with memory. The Henley house loomed ahead on Maple Street, quiet, unassuming, almost ordinary. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered across the doorway like a cruel banner, warning of the horrors contained within. He parked across the street, letting himself linger for a moment, taking in the unremarkable white stucco, the fatting red roof tiles, the tiny yard with grass clawing for life. This was the kind of house that promised safety and then shattered it, just like Cedar Street had decades ago. Time was short. The detective had warned him the investigation was nearly done, the house soon to be handed back to those who remained. Bennett checked the bundle of matting in his hands, his camera bag, the phone fully charged. If anything went wrong here, he would leave a record. Catherine had been right. This path he was following wasn't just dangerous, it was magnetic. Violence had a pattern, and he was walking straight into its pulse. The tape gave way under his fingers, snapping softly. Inside, the air felt heavier than he remembered, thick with unspoken history, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Bennett moved without hesitation, heading straight for the study where the displaced Matt waited. The room was unchanged, yet completely different. Before, it had been a curious anomaly, a misaligned mat, a subtle irregularity. Now it was a narrative written in wood and fiber. The mat sat skewed, daring him to look, to uncover what lay beneath. He knelt, heart hammering, and lifted the corner. Beneath, the floor bore the same telltale signs he had learned to read in his father's study. Boards that didn't quite match, stains sanded and refinished but never fully erased. Here, someone had died, and someone had tried desperately to make the world forget. This house, this mat, this floor, they were not just evidence. They were a message, a memory, a trap left behind by violence itself, waiting for someone who could see it. Bennett had found it, and he was ready to follow it to the end. Bennett lowered the mat from his childhood home onto the floor beside the one taken from the Henley house, and his breath caught instantly. It wasn't just similar, it was unmistakable. The same tight grass weave, the same dimensions, the same method of fitting, cut to lie flat as if meant to disappear into the room. Even the stains mirrored each other, dark, rust-colored shadows that spoke of struggle, of moments someone had tried desperately to erase. He forced himself to stay calm, methodical. He raised his phone and began documenting everything, angles, edges, patterns, stains, moving with the practiced discipline that had defined his career. But the longer he worked, the heavier the room became. The silence thickened, pressing inward, no longer empty but swollen as if it were holding its breath. When his fingers finally touched the Henley mat, the reaction was violent. The world seemed to fold in on itself. A crushing wave of sensation surged through him, not sound in the way he once understood it, but something deeper and more invasive. Emotion, fear, and raw human presence flooded his body all at once. His mouth tasted like metal. His chest tightened with borrowed panic. He wasn't remembering, he was arriving. Voices tore through him. Accusations, ownership, pleas that trembled with exhaustion and terror. A woman demanding freedom, a man refusing to surrender control. Another voice, steady but shaking, trying to protect children already crying somewhere beyond sight. The details were different from what he'd felt before. Different people, different house, but the rhythm was the same. A family fracturing in real time, love rotting into rage, a home becoming a trap. Bennett pressed his palm harder into the fibers, desperate to understand. The sensations sharpened. He could feel the precise instant when shouting crossed into violence, when words stopped being weapons and bodies took over. And beneath it all, thin, fragile, devastating, a child's voice surfaced. Small, confused, afraid. Why are you hurting her? The question detonated inside him. The room vanished. He was no longer an adult investigator kneeling on hardwood. He was 3 years old again, curled tight in darkness, watching his universe collapse. The sounds he'd lost decades ago came rushing back, not through his ears, but through memory etched into bone and nerve and instinct. He tore his hand away, gasping as the floor tilted beneath him. Time blurred. Past and present tangled together until he couldn't tell which house he was standing in, or which family's nightmare he'd just witnessed. The silence that had defined his life for nearly 3 decades suddenly felt fragile, like a thin wall holding back a flood he might not survive. Bennett sank back onto his heels, shaking. Beside him, the mat from his own childhood seemed to hum with invitation. He could feel it pulling at him, urging him to reach out, to plunge deeper into the preserved violence of his own beginning. The temptation was almost unbearable. But he stopped himself. He already knew the truth. This wasn't coincidence. The Henley house and the home on Cedar Street weren't just similar in structure or tragedy. They were linked by something far more disturbing. These weren't ordinary mats. They weren't passive witnesses. They were vessels, absorbing terror, recording it, holding onto the emotional residue of violence long after blood had dried. Places like this didn't forget. And somehow Bennett had been drawn to them again and again. His career, his obsessions, his fixation on broken families and unresolved crimes. None of it had been accidental. He'd been circling his own origin story, following a trail laid down long before he understood it. The only question left was what came next. He stood slowly, his legs unsteady, the air around him charged with the sense that something irreversible had just shifted. He wrapped both pieces of matting together in the same old sheet his father had used, binding the past and present into a single bundle. That's when he noticed it. The weave patterns weren't just alike. They were identical. Not similar craftsmanship, not matching styles. The exact same pattern, repeated with mechanical precision, as if both mats had been cut from the same source, the same shipment, maybe even the same roll. His pulse spiked. Bennett reached into his jacket for the letter his father had left behind. As he unfolded the pages, something slipped free and fluttered to the floor. A brittle, yellowed newspaper clipping. The date jumped out first. Mid-December, mid-1980s. The article was brief, buried in a business column. A small import company shutting its doors amid legal trouble. Multiple customer complaints. Decorative flooring linked to violent incidents in otherwise stable households. One line was underlined twice. The owner claimed the products were spiritually contaminated. In the margin, written in his father's familiar, careful hand, was a note that made Bennett's blood run cold. Ask Donna where she bought the mats. She kept the receipt. Below it, another line. Purchased spring 1985. Same supplier. Bennett stared at the clipping, the mats, the room. This wasn't just his story. It never had been. Bennett realized then that his father hadn't discovered the article by accident. He'd gone looking for it, after everything had already shattered. The handwriting in the margins told the real story. Too many parallels, too many echoes. Harold had known that what destroyed their family didn't begin inside their walls. Bennett's hands trembled as he read on. The article quoted the importer's founder, a man named Kenji Ishida, claiming the woven materials were compromised long before they reached anyone's home. That intense emotional suffering, especially violent death, could imprint itself onto living fibers, grass, reeds, anything that once grew from the earth. Authorities had mocked the idea. The article cut off there. But the back of the clipping was filled with his father's notes. Ishida dead by 87. Son shut down company, burned remaining stock. Son said his father believed the grass was harvested from mass burial sites. Places soaked in pain. Pain can live, pain can travel. Bennett slid down until his back hit the wall, breath shallow, chest tight. The timeline snapped into place with horrifying clarity. The mats bought in early 1985. The violence later that same year. Harold, broken and desperate, digging through libraries and archives afterward, searching for something, anything, that could explain how love had turned into slaughter in his living room. At the very bottom of the page, underlined so hard the pencil had torn the paper, were the words that made Bennett feel suddenly cold. Not just us, never just us, it spreads. The realization landed like a verdict. This wasn't a single tragedy. It was a pattern, a chain, and by touching the mats, by opening himself to what they held, Bennett had stepped directly into it. The question wasn't whether it was real anymore. The question was whether it would consume him too. He froze. Not because he heard anything he couldn't, but because the air changed. Subtle, heavy, as if pressure had shifted in the room. Bennett held perfectly still, every muscle locked, focusing on vibrations, on movement, on the faintest disturbance that might warn him of someone nearby. Footsteps reached the doorway, then stopped. His pulse roared in his chest. Slowly, carefully, Bennett turned toward the door. Nothing. The threshold was empty. No shadow, no movement. And yet the sensation of being watched intensified, pressing against his skin, crowding his thoughts. The room felt smaller now, thicker, like something unseen was leaning in, testing the space. Bennett's gaze dropped to the mats beneath his hands. And in that instant, understanding struck him with brutal force. The presence wasn't outside the room. It never had been. It was already here. The pressure surged from beneath his hands, seeping through his skin, climbing his arms like a rising tide. The vibration he had felt before was no longer a single sensation. It had deepened into layers, folding over themselves, dense and alive. What pressed against him now wasn't one memory or one voice. It was everyone. Not bodies, not ghosts in the way stories usually describe them. Presence. Lives ended violently, their final moments woven into the very grass beneath his palms. Pain that had been absorbed, stored, passed along quietly from home to home, generation to generation. They crowded the threshold between past and present, not clawing to escape, but waiting, enduring. hungry but not for blood. They wanted release. Bennett understood it with sudden, devastating clarity, what his father had sensed, what the articles hinted at, what every uneasy instinct had been warning him about since childhood. The cycle wasn't random. It wasn't fate. It was accumulation. Trauma layered upon trauma until the object itself became a trigger, a spark waiting for the next family, the next argument, the next moment of weakness. And it could stop, but only if someone was willing to carry it all. Bennett shut his eyes. The decision settled inside him with terrible calm. He could walk away, leave the mats here, let the pattern continue its quiet migration. Or he could end it now, pull every last fragment of that suffering into himself and make sure it went no further. The cost radiated toward him like heat. He didn't hesitate. He pressed both palms down fully, deliberately, connecting himself to both pieces at once. The world detonated. Sound didn't return gently. It arrived like a violent flood tearing through a collapsed dam. His own breath slammed into his awareness, raw and ragged. The building groaned. Distant engines screamed past outside. His heartbeat thundered so loudly it felt like it might rupture his chest. And beneath it all, the voices. Not one, not dozens. Hundreds. They crashed through him in a tidal wave of terror and grief, so intense his sense of self began to fracture. Moments he had never lived slammed into his mind with brutal intimacy. A man cut down in a field as he tried to shield his children. A woman begging on her knees in a house that smelled like cleaning chemicals and fear. His mother's final moments, vivid and merciless, replaying with a clarity that stole the air from his lungs. Every death unfolded from the inside. Bennett's body convulsed as if struck by electricity. His back arched, fingers locked, jaw clenched so hard he tasted blood, his own and not his own. Tears streamed freely, uncontrollable, as grief poured through him that had been waiting decades, centuries to be felt. The voices didn't speak in unison. They screamed, prayed, cried, bargained. A child's voice pierced through the chaos, small and broken, asking a question no one had answered in time. An old man murmured words in a language Bennett didn't know but somehow understood. His own voice, too young, too small, calling out for a mother who would never answer again. Please, let us go. The instinct to release his grip was overwhelming, to drop the mats, to let the noise stop. His sanity stretched thin, trembling moments from collapse. But he held on, because letting go now wouldn't free them. It would scatter them. Another wave slammed into him, harder, deeper. This time it wasn't just deaths. It was the connections between them, the invisible lines linking one broken home to another. How violence had traveled silently, carried across oceans in woven grass, planted into houses that believed themselves safe. He could see it all now, feel it, the way each act fed the next, how the mats didn't create violence, but amplified what was already there, nudging unstable moments toward catastrophe. His nails dug into his palms until blood slicked the fibers. The taste in his mouth shifted, metal, salt, damp earth, rain-soaked soil, grass growing over graves. The memories stopped feeling borrowed. They became his. He was the farmer, the mother, the child, his parents, living their endings while clinging desperately to the single truth anchoring him to the present. This is my choice. I am still me. A whisper cut through the storm. Maybe his own voice, maybe not. It's too much. His grip faltered. Then something unexpected rose beneath the agony. Gratitude. Not relief, but trust. They weren't trying to destroy him. They were giving him what they had carried for too long. Each scream was a burden being lifted, each memory a handoff. They believed he could hold it, that he would finish what had been left unfinished. Bennett screamed, not in fear but defiance, and pulled everything in. The pain peaked, blinding absolute. And then, silence. Not the hollow absence he had lived with his entire life, but a deep settled quiet. The weight lifted, the pressure dissolved. Beneath his hands the mats felt empty, just fibers, just grass, just objects at last. Bennett collapsed forward, breath tearing from his lungs in violent sobs. His body shook, exhausted beyond measure, but beneath the wreckage something else stirred. Peace. The cycle was broken. Whatever had been carried across years, and blood and earth had ended with him. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt complete. Bennett let go. For the first time, he stopped resisting and opened himself fully to the weight pressing through him. The pain wasn't just physical, it was infinite, stretching beyond his body, beyond his mind, and merging into raw experience. He became every life that had ended too soon, every betrayal that had shattered trust, every final breath drawn in fear. The world of the living and the dead collapsed into one. And then slowly a new sensation began to filter through the storm. Peace. Not his own, not yet, but theirs. One by one, as he accepted each fragment of suffering, the voices softened. The farmer's spirit, finally seen and honored, drifted into nothingness. The families across oceans, long silenced, finally released their grip. His mother's voice was the last and the hardest. The terror, the betrayal, the desperate love for the child hiding upstairs. He felt it all, raw and unfiltered. It threatened to shatter him completely. But within the chaos there was love, forgiveness, gratitude. Donna's presence lingered like warmth on a cold night, whispering words he could feel more than hear. "It's okay. You can let me go now." Hours seemed to pass in a heartbeat. The last echo faded, the final spirit dissolved, and Bennett found himself alone in his mind for the first time in decades. He opened his eyes. The mats beneath his hands were transformed, once dark with old stains, now pale and soft, ordinary grass, finally free from the weight they had carried for generations. And with the silence that followed came clarity. The voices were gone. The suffering was released. The cycle had ended. No other family would inherit the violence hidden in those fibers. Tears streamed down Bennett's face, but they were different now. Relief, gratitude, and awe at the responsibility he had carried and released. He stood, legs trembling, and felt his restored hearing beginning to fade. But it didn't matter. This was no longer loss, it was choice. The silence he embraced now was his own, not imposed by trauma, but claimed by him. Carefully, he wrapped the mats in the sheet. Tomorrow he would burn them, scatter the ashes, and erase whatever trace of pain they had held. Tonight he would return home, carrying only his own presence, his own life, finally unburdened. The Henley house exhaled behind him, settling into quiet, its walls relieved of the weight they had held for so long. Its tragedy was complete. The threads of suffering that had begun in a distant field decades ago were severed. Bennett walked to his car, steady and resolute, feeling the night air embrace him. Messages from Catherine vibrated in his pocket, her concern reaching across space. But he didn't answer yet. He had done what needed to be done. The road stretched before him, dark, endless, full of possibility. No ghosts trailed him. No legacy of pain clung to his shoulders. He drove into the night, silent in the way he had chosen, carrying not trauma but freedom. The pattern was broken. The cycle was ended. Bennett Hartwell, born of tragedy and heir to violence, had decided, here now, in the quiet between worlds, that he would be something different. In a life shaped by loss, he had discovered that the greatest courage sometimes lies not in fighting, but in choosing to let the hurt stop with you. And as the miles unfolded beneath his wheels, the California darkness around him felt alive with possibility, carrying him toward whatever came next, finally unchained, finally free.